Hi everybody. This tutorial video is going to be about how to make handles and how to attach handles. And we're going to do it to a basic slab built cup. The first method I want to talk about is a very traditional technique called pulling a handle. It's usually associated with throwing on the potter's wheel because it has that very fluid, very stretched, very uniform quality. But in order to pull a handle, you need to have a container with water in it because it can get kind of messy, as you'll see. And we'll start with just kind of a wedged piece of clay, and I've kind of formed it. Usually I use a bigger ball because I pull multiple handles at a time, but I'm just going to pull one and then show you a different technique. But I've kind of formed it into kind of like a pointed cone at the bottom. I'm going to be holding it upside down like this, like an upside down cone. So over my water, I'm going to hold it with one hand, and then with my other, make sure I've got enough water on that point of the cone, and I'm going to start pulling it, holding my hand like in a rounded configuration. My fingers are kind of curled around that point, and it's going to slowly start to stretch that point, and it's going to get longer. And you always want to make sure it's slick. If you ever feel that it's drying out, grab more water because you don't want it to break. You just want it to be this nice, fluid, pulled coil. Now, once you have a coil that you think is approximately the length of my handle, from here to here, let's say, then you can kind of make your handle more of a strap shape by going from this configuration to kind of flattening it out. So now I'm going to be kind of compressing like that. And if I feel like the bottom's starting to ball up on me, I will almost pinch that off to avoid breaking the handle. And I continue to stretch, and you'll see this from, I'll hold this up so you can see it from that side and then the wall thickness side, right? That's how I flattened it out. So it has that really fluid stretch quality, and I'll bend it right now for you so you can kind of see how nice and fluid that would be, right? And make your handles longer than you think you're going to need them. And some people like to train their handles in a curve as they start to kind of firm up a little bit. They'll just like do something like that with the ball of clay and let it kind of dry a little bit to the point where they can pick it up without messing it up. So it can't be sticky wet. You still want it to be a little bit pliable, but you want it to generally hold its shape. I've had some handles here that I made a little while ago, and they've been air drying, so you can see what I mean. They're holding their shape. There's some bend to them, right? But I can kind of manipulate them a little bit, but without cracking them. But I'm not going to make a mess of them when I'm kind of trimming them and applying them. So that's one method, the pulled handle. The other method, I'll cut this off. There we go. Is to just kind of form and roll a coil. Right, so on a clean, flat board, I'm just going to start rolling. This clay's a little on the wet side from pulling it so much. I'm going to cut this down. I don't need to be quite so long. Continue to roll this. I want it to be, pretty uniform. If you want your handle to be wider at the top and taper, you want your coil to taper as well. If you want it to be consistent from top to bottom, you want your coil to be kind of even and uniform. So this is going to get a little bit wider. So you want to roll out your coil so that it's narrower than you want your handle to be, right, but relatively even. Then lie it flat on your board, and then take your fingers, dip it in some water, and now we're going to do our compression, where I'm kind of pushing down right? And flattening, turning that coil into more of a strap. And I can kind of flip this over. Flatten the other side. Now the edges, if they get a little irregular and uneven, you can just take your fingers and kind of place them on the sides of your handle. You notice I do this in a real fluid way, right? So that it stays nice and uniform and doesn't get, if I did this really slowly, I could easily kind of mess that up. All right, now, once I've created that nice strap shape, there's so many different things you can do to your handle, right? In terms of aesthetics and how you want them to look. If you want it to be just nice and flat and smooth, just take a damp sponge over it, boom, flat and smooth. If you want to do something like, let's say, this, right, where there's like this little bit of a ridge, I want to make sure everybody's seeing this. Right, where there's a little bit of a groove in the top, right? You kind of see that? You can kind of take your fingers like this and create that kind of groove, right, in the top of your handle, and then soften your edges, right? So that's a super long handle. You would then kind of bend it, right, to create kind of like the general shape that you want. You could do it on its side or like this, and let it sit for enough time to where you can, it again holds its shape like these handles, right? But it's not sticky wet, right? So you can kind of like place them. All right, so now that's making your handles. Now let's talk about attaching handles. We've got this cup that I built a little while ago. That's firm, holds its shape, isn't going to be sticky wet, and I'm not going to destroy it when I'm trying to put handles on. And I'm going to hold up a handle, right? Decide where I want it to be, and then I'm going to trim it. I'm going to first trim, right? I'm going to stare down at the curve of my wall, and I'm going to try to mimic that with my little line, right? And then I'm going to kind of cut. Cut along that curve. So it will attach really nicely, right against the curve of my wall, right? The more you pay attention to these things, the cleaner everything's going to look. Okay, then let me show you a great tip. I'm going to take my scoring tool and I'm going to score just to the inside, not affecting any of the edges. I'm going to take my finger, I'm going to dip it in water and use my fingernail, and I'm going to just kind of pound on the inside of that. And it's going to stretch that clay out just right there, just flare it out where you want more clay. So that's good. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to score to the inside again. And I'm going to kind of figure out, I'm going to sit it where I want it to be, gently. And I'm going to trace around it with my needle. And I'm going to score just to the inside of that line. I'm going to use a generous amount of construction slip. I'm going to apply that to my handle. Generous. And then I'm going to sit that on there, and I'm going to really apply some pressure, right? And I'm holding my fingers on the inside. This is why you want your handle to be firm. Perfect. Now the bottom, right? Like I've got that long handle. I know I don't need that much handle, right? This is a small cup. You know, it could be easily a 2-finger handle. So I'm going to cut through that, and I'm going to lift that up a little bit. It still bends. That looks like it's probably a good size in terms of proportion. And then I'm going to trace around where I want that bottom piece to attach. I can just kind of move this a little bit to the side and then score score. And I'm going to score the bottom of that carefully. Again, use a generous amount of slip. There we go. Push that on. Use some force. Now all that slip that oozes out, right, on all sides. I could go in with a wood tool, but it would be easy to make marks. I like to use my soft Sumi brush here and just take some of that slip and just brush it out. I used a lot. I probably didn't need to use quite so much. I could probably take my sponge here and do some cleanup. But I avoid, hard-edged tools, and I like brushes because they get into the interior there of where your handle attaches, or an elephant ear sponge. But I don't want to make marks. I always think the more fussing you do with clay, the more fussed with it ends up looking, and the least fussy, the more effortless it looks, right? So sometimes you can let that slip dry a little bit so it doesn't shrink, but that's a well secured handle, and it looks very, very clean. It looks like it's in proportion. So the same rule would apply with any handle. You would just kind of trim the top. I usually attach the top first. Also the angle, right? Think about the direction of the wall and how the angle of how you cut your handle too, because if you cut a handle like this, right, it might go down, right? If you cut an angle like this, it might kind of start coming up when you attach it to the body of the cup. So think about that angle as well as like the curve of the wall, right, when you're kind of attaching your handles. Anyway, timing is key, right? Don't let the body of your cup get too dry. Then your handle isn't going to want to attach. It's going to crack during the drying process. And handles, you want to make more handles than you think you're going to need. Like I usually make, if I have one cup I'm putting a handle on, I'm making 2 or 3 handles in case something happens during the process of adhering it. Think in terms of production. All right, well, thank you. I hope you enjoy this. Happy handles.